I was just 12 when my life changed forever. After losing my parents in a car accident, I thought I had no one left. The relatives who were supposed to care for me didn't hesitate for a second to sell me to a wealthy family in Connecticut. They said it would be for my own good, that the Whitakers could give me a better life. I wanted to believe them, but deep down I felt scared and alone. When I arrived at the Whitaker mansion, the first thing I noticed was how big and cold it felt. The walls were tall, the floors polished, and the air smelled faintly of flowers and cleaning products. I was no longer a child with freedom. I was just a servant expected to know my place. The first face I saw was Madeline Whitaker, the matriarch of the house. Her eyes were sharp and cold, and she didn't even bother to hide her dislike for me. I had never met anyone who looked at me that way before. Then there were her children, Chloe and Derek. Chloe was always whispering and laughing with her friends while glaring at me. Derek barely looked at me, but when he did, his smirk made me feel smaller than I already was. Every command felt like a test of how much I could endure. Making beds, scrubbing floors, carrying heavy trays. I did everything without complaint, even when my arms ached and my back ached more. There was no warmth, no kindness. I felt invisible, yet painfully aware of every mistake I made. The nights were the hardest. I lay on a small mattress in a corner room, listening to the echoes of laughter from the other rooms. I wanted to cry, but I held it in. I told myself I had to be strong, even if no one else cared. Some nights I would whisper to myself about my parents, wishing they were still here to protect me. I promised myself that one day I would find a way to change my fate, but for now, survival was all I could focus on. Even in the harshness of the Whitaker household, small moments of hope flickered. I noticed a few of the staff who were kind, giving me a quiet nod or a smile as if to say, "You're not alone." Those tiny gestures reminded me that I still had a spark of humanity to hold on to. But mostly, I felt the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. The people who were supposed to care had sold me like property, and I was trapped in a world that made it clear I was nothing. And yet, somewhere deep inside, I felt a strange sense that my story wasn't finished. I couldn't see it yet, but I knew that life had more in store for me than this cold, grand mansion. I just had to survive long enough to find it. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. Life in the Whitaker house was far harder than I could have imagined. From the moment I woke up until the late hours of the night, there was always work waiting for me. I scrubbed floors until my hands were raw, washed dishes that seemed to multiply, and made sure every corner of the house was spotless. Chloe and Derek never missed a chance to mock me, whispering cruel jokes when they thought I couldn't hear. Madeline Whitaker would glare at me if anything wasn't perfect, and even the smallest mistake brought sharp words and icy stares. Sometimes, while scrubbing a floor or carrying a heavy tray, memories of my relatives would come back to me. I remembered the day they handed me over to the Whitakers. Their smiles were fake, and their words about giving me a better life now felt like lies. I had trusted them once, and they had sold me for money without a second thought. I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. How could someone who called themselves family betray a child so easily? Those memories haunted me as I worked, reminding me that I had to survive on my own. Amid all this cruelty, there were rare glimpses of kindness. Mr. Whitaker, the father, was one of the few people who treated me with a hint of decency. He would sometimes speak to me in a calm voice, ask if I had eaten, or offer a small piece of advice. Those moments were brief, but they reminded me that not everyone was cruel. Still, his gentle presence was often overshadowed by Madeline's harsh control, and the children's teasing left little room for comfort. When the house finally quieted at night, I found ways to escape, even if only for a little while. I discovered old books in the library and would hide in corners to read, losing myself in stories that felt like another world. Each page I turned filled me with hope and a sense of possibility. I imagined a future where I could be free, where I could live without fear and humiliation. Reading became my secret refuge, a way to hold onto my mind and spirit when my body felt exhausted and trapped. I began to dream more boldly during those quiet hours. I imagined myself standing tall, respected, and in control of my own life. I pictured a world where I wasn't at the mercy of people like the Whitakers or the relatives who had betrayed me. Those dreams were fragile at first, but they slowly grew stronger, giving me a reason to keep going through the long days filled with work and pain. Even though I was still trapped, the nights of learning and imagining a better life gave me a quiet strength. I understood that survival alone was not enough. I had to prepare for a future where I could reclaim my own life. Little did I know, the path to that future would come through secrets, revelations, and the truth that no one had expected. One afternoon, while carrying a tray of food to the dining room, I nearly tripped and dropped everything. A voice called out before I could even apologize. "Careful, honey. You're doing fine," said Sophie, one of the older housekeepers. She had kind eyes and a gentle way of speaking that immediately made me feel a little safer. Over time, I learned that Sophie had worked for the Whitakers for many years and had her own story of hardship. She had grown up in a poor family and understood what it was like to be overlooked and mistreated. Sophie became my first real friend in the house. She noticed when I was struggling and offered advice on how to handle the endless chores and the children's teasing. She taught me small tricks to save time, ways to avoid drawing unnecessary attention from Madeline, and how to keep my spirit intact even when the day felt unbearable. More than that, she reminded me that I was stronger than I realized and that hope, no matter how small, could be a powerful thing. Some evenings, Sophie would quietly sit with me in the kitchen after her shift ended. She told me stories about her own life, how she had learned to stand tall despite difficult circumstances, how she had found ways to achieve small victories even when the world seemed against her. Listening to her, I began to understand that suffering didn't have to break a person completely. There could be small moments of victory, and every day I survived, I was learning how to be clever and patient. Sophie also noticed that I loved reading and learning. She encouraged me to ask questions, to think for myself, and to pay attention to details that others overlooked. She whispered that one day, knowledge and patience could become weapons of their own, and I started to realize she was right. Even in the cold, harsh walls of the mansion, I could build strength in my mind. Her support gave me a new sense of purpose. I began to pay closer attention to the house, the family, and even the patterns of how people behaved. I noticed Chloe's arrogance, Derek's selfishness, and even Madeline's small cracks of insecurity. I began imagining ways I could use what I learned to protect myself and eventually gain control over my own life. It was strange to feel hope and cunning at the same time, but Sophie's guidance made me understand that survival and intelligence could go hand in hand. Through Sophie, I realized that even in a house filled with cruelty, there could be warmth, trust, and lessons that prepared me for the future. For the first time, I started to believe that life might offer me a chance to fight back, to prove my worth, and perhaps one day, claim the life that had been stolen from me. One morning, the Whitakers received a visit from a serious-looking man in a neat suit. He introduced himself as a private investigator and explained that he had been hired to check some legal matters related to the family. I didn't think much of it at first, but soon I noticed him asking questions about me, where I came from, my parents, and my distant relatives. Something about his interest felt different from the usual questions, and a small part of me felt nervous and curious at the same time. A few days later, I overheard that the investigator had suggested a DNA test. It was connected to an old claim from distant relatives I had barely known. I didn't understand all the details, but I felt a strange mix of fear and hope. Maybe this test would change nothing, but maybe it would reveal something I had never expected. I tried to keep my mind busy with chores and reading, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. When the results finally came, my life changed in ways I could never have imagined. I learned that I was not just an ordinary orphan. I was actually the biological granddaughter of a wealthy patriarch, a fortune that had been kept hidden from me by my greedy relatives. The thought hit me like a storm. All the betrayal, all the suffering, suddenly had a different meaning. The people who had sold me for money had robbed me of not just my childhood, but also the life I was meant to have. I felt a surge of anger, but also a new kind of determination. For the first time, I realized that I had the knowledge of the truth, even if no one else had admitted it yet. The Whitakers were shocked when the results were confirmed, and I noticed subtle changes in the way they looked at me. Some were confused, some fearful, and some clearly worried about what this meant. I, however, kept my expression calm, knowing that I needed to think carefully before making any moves. That night, as I lay on my small bed, I started planning quietly. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but now I had a reason to fight. I began thinking about the steps I could take to reclaim what was rightfully mine. Every detail mattered, the legal documents, the family dynamics, and even the weaknesses I had observed over the years. I realized that patience and strategy would be more powerful than anger alone. For the first time, I didn't feel like a powerless child. I felt a quiet strength building inside me, a readiness to change my life on my own terms. I understood that the fortune and the truth were mine, but I had to be clever, careful, and patient to take them. That night, I made a promise to myself. I would survive, I would fight, and I would claim the life that had been stolen from me. After learning the truth about my family and inheritance, I felt a storm of emotions inside me. Anger bubbled up every time I thought about my relatives who had sold me, about the life I had been denied, and about the Whitakers who had treated me like I was nothing. Part of me wanted to confront them immediately, to shout, to make them feel the pain they had caused me. But another part knew that acting too soon could ruin everything. I had to wait for the right moment, to be patient and smart. I began watching the Whitaker household more closely than ever. Every conversation, every argument, every careless remark became important. I noticed how Madeline's temper could be manipulated, how Chloe was overly confident but gullible, and how Derek's arrogance often made him underestimate others. Even Mr. Whitaker had flaws that could be used strategically. I started mapping out the family dynamics in my mind, understanding their weaknesses and strengths, and thinking about how they could work in my favor. At night, when the house was quiet, I started memorizing conversations I had overheard during the day. I paid attention to lies, secrets, and cruel plans that the family didn't know I had heard. I even began writing notes in a hidden notebook, keeping track of every injustice and manipulation. Each detail felt like a piece of armor, a tool I could use later. I was no longer just surviving, I was preparing. My mind often wandered into dark places, thinking about revenge and justice. I asked myself what it really meant to reclaim my life. Was revenge only about hurting them back? Or was it about proving my worth and taking back what had been stolen? I realized it had to be the latter. I didn't want to destroy anyone out of spite. I wanted to rise above the betrayal, to use intelligence, patience, and strategy to regain my identity. The emotional turmoil was intense. There were moments when I felt tears burning behind my eyes, remembering my parents, the relatives who betrayed me, and the years I had lost. But each time the sadness came, I turned it into determination. Every act of cruelty I had endured became fuel for the careful plans I was building in my mind. I imagined a day when I could walk into a room and be respected, when my voice would matter, when I could look at those who wronged me without fear. I was learning that patience and observation could be more powerful than anger. I began to understand that my strength didn't just lie in surviving the past. It lay in preparing for the future. Every whispered secret, every careless boast, and every weak spot I discovered brought me closer to taking control of my life. And deep inside, I felt a quiet but growing confidence that one day, I would reclaim everything that had been taken from me. As I grew more confident in my plans, I realized I couldn't act alone. I needed allies, people who understood the house and its hidden truths. Sophie became more than a friend. She became my confidant. I shared some of my thoughts with her, careful not to reveal everything, and she offered advice, guidance, and quiet encouragement. Slowly, I gained the trust of a few other staff members, those who had seen the unfairness and cruelty of the Whitakers over the years. They began to notice that I was different, not just a maid, but someone who thought ahead and paid attention. I also started testing loyalties within the family. Chloe's manipulations and Derek's selfishness were easy to observe if you watched closely. Chloe would twist situations to make herself look innocent while putting others in trouble, and Derek often ignored responsibilities when it suited him. I found small ways to point these behaviors out to Mr. Whitaker without making it seem like I was meddling. I presented facts subtly, letting him notice the truth for himself. It gave me a quiet influence in the household, and I could see he began paying more attention to me, seeing that I wasn't just a helpless child. Meanwhile, I studied everything I could about the family's finances and legal matters. I discovered old documents, letters, and records that revealed loopholes and inconsistencies. Each detail added to the growing plan in my mind. I understood how the inheritance could be legally challenged if handled carefully. It was like putting together a puzzle, each piece bringing me closer to reclaiming what was mine. I felt a quiet thrill knowing that one day, the secrets I had uncovered would give me power and leverage over those who had once controlled and humiliated me. As I worked quietly, I started preparing for the moment when the truth about my DNA would be revealed. I imagined how the family would react when they could no longer deny my rightful place. Every observation I made, every ally I quietly gathered, and every piece of information I collected was part of that future moment. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming justice, respect, and my own life. During this time, I felt a growing sense of empowerment. I realized that being patient, clever, and strategic could turn the household's power structure in my favor without a single overt confrontation. The staff began to trust me. The family began to notice me in small ways, and I felt stronger than ever before. For the first time, I knew that my life was no longer entirely in the hands of those who had betrayed me. I was quietly shaping my future, building my influence, and preparing for the day when the truth would finally come to light. The day finally came when the DNA results were formally presented to the family. The Whitakers gathered in the grand living room, tense and uneasy, while the lawyer carefully explained the findings. Every word felt like a drumbeat in my chest. When he announced that I was the biological granddaughter of the wealthy patriarch who had disowned the family for their greed, the room fell completely silent. Madeline's face went pale, Chloe froze mid-step, and even Derek's usual smirk vanished. I could see shock, fear, and disbelief flashing across their faces all at once. For a moment, I let the silence speak. I had waited years for this moment, silently observing, planning, and preparing. Now, I stepped forward with a calmness I hadn't felt in a long time. I looked at Madeline, then Chloe and Derek, and spoke in a voice steady but firm. I know you never cared about me. You sold me, humiliated me, and treated me like I was nothing. But now the truth is clear. I am not just anyone. I am the rightful heir to what was stolen from me. Madeline's eyes narrowed, but she had no words. Chloe and Derek looked like they wanted to argue, to deny it, but I held their gaze and didn't let them interrupt. I reminded them of every cruel word, every act of manipulation, and every moment they had tried to make me feel small. You thought I was powerless, I said. But all those years you spent thinking I would stay in my corner only made me stronger. Every injustice you committed has led me here, standing in the place you tried to take from me. There was tension in the room, thick enough to feel like it could break. I saw Madeline clench her fists, Chloe bite her lip, and Derek glance away. But I didn't back down. I wasn't yelling or begging. I was stating the truth with dignity, showing that the power had shifted. For the first time, I realized that the fear and humiliation I had endured had turned into authority and respect. I was no longer a victim. I was a force to be acknowledged. The lawyer finalized the legal matters, confirming that I had every right to the inheritance and my place in the family lineage. It was poetic justice. The family who had tried to erase me from their world now had to face the consequences of their actions. The humiliation they had caused me came back to them in the form of truth and justice, and I watched silently as they struggled to accept it. As I stood there, I felt a strange mixture of triumph and relief. I had reclaimed not only my inheritance, but also my dignity. The confrontation had been tense, emotional, and powerful, and it marked the turning point in my life. For the first time, I felt that all the pain, betrayal, and hardship had led to something meaningful. I had survived, and I had risen above the people who had tried to destroy me. After the confrontation, I moved quickly to secure what was rightfully mine. With the lawyer's help, I legally claimed my inheritance and took my place in the family fortune. Every document I signed, every official step I completed, felt like a piece of my life that had been missing finally falling into place. I was no longer a powerless girl. I was recognized, respected, and finally in control of my own future. I also made sure that the people who had betrayed me faced the consequences of their actions. My distant relatives, the ones who sold me for money, were confronted with evidence of their deceit. They couldn't deny what they had done, and I watched as they had to answer for their betrayal. Chloe and Derek, who had treated me with cruelty for years, also faced their own reckoning. They were no longer able to act with arrogance or disregard, and the power I had gained made them aware that their behavior would no longer go unchecked. Through it all, Mr. Whitaker, who had been quiet and distant for much of my time in the house, began to support me openly once he understood the full truth. He acknowledged my rightful place and treated me with the respect I had earned. His quiet approval felt like an unexpected validation, and it reminded me that not everyone involved in my life had been cruel or selfish. It was a small but important reinforcement that justice could come in many forms. But reclaiming my inheritance and securing justice wasn't enough for me. I wanted my life to mean something more than revenge. I decided to start a foundation for orphaned children, giving them opportunities and support that I had been denied. It became my mission to help those who were vulnerable and overlooked, to create a place where they could feel safe, valued, and hopeful. Seeing the first children benefit from the foundation gave me a sense of purpose and fulfillment that no wealth or revenge ever could. In this process, I realized how much I had grown. I had turned anger and betrayal into action, pain into empowerment. I had survived years of humiliation and cruelty, and instead of being consumed by bitterness, I chose to rise above it. I understood that the best kind of revenge was not hurting others, but reclaiming my life and building something meaningful in its place. As I walked through my new life, I felt a sense of peace that I had never known before. The mansion, the fortune, and even the recognition from the family were no longer just symbols of revenge. They were proof that I had endured, fought, and emerged stronger. I had taken back my identity, my dignity, and my future. And most importantly, I had created a way to give hope to others who had been forgotten, showing that even after betrayal and hardship, life could be rebuilt with courage and compassion. Once I had secured my inheritance and my place in the family, I turned my attention to those who had caused me the most pain. My distant relatives, the ones who had sold me for money, were confronted quietly but firmly. I made sure they understood the consequences of their greed. They could no longer ignore the damage they had caused, and I arranged for them to face accountability, both socially and legally. Watching them realize that their actions had finally caught up with them brought a quiet sense of justice. Chloe and Derek also faced repercussions. Chloe lost privileges she had always taken for granted, and Derek's careless arrogance was exposed to friends and colleagues who had once admired him. I didn't act out of cruelty, but I made sure their actions had consequences. It was satisfying to see them confronted with their own behavior, a reminder that cruelty can never go unnoticed forever. As I observed these changes, I reflected on my own journey. The betrayal I had suffered, though painful, had shaped me into someone stronger, smarter, and more determined. Every act of injustice I endured taught me patience, observation, and strategy. I realized that the very hardships I had faced had fueled my growth and intelligence, giving me tools to survive and thrive in a world that had tried to crush me. I understood that strength comes not just from winning battles, but from learning from the struggles themselves. At the same time, I wrestled with my own emotions. Part of me had wanted to lash out, to let anger guide my actions, but I saw that true power lay in control and dignity. I understood that revenge does not always mean hurting others. Sometimes it means proving yourself, reclaiming your life, and refusing to let bitterness dominate you. Choosing empowerment over resentment became my turning point. I could take satisfaction in justice while still keeping my heart clear and focused on the future I wanted to build. This period of reflection also gave me clarity about forgiveness. I didn't need to forgive those who had wronged me to move forward, but I chose to release the anger that could have consumed me. I turned my energy toward growth, helping others, and creating a life that reflected my values rather than my pain. The lessons I had learned about betrayal, cruelty, and resilience became a guide for how I wanted to live. By the end, I understood that true revenge is subtle and intelligent. It's not about punishing blindly, but about rising above injustice and reclaiming your life fully. I felt a sense of peace and satisfaction that I had never known before. My journey had been shaped by hardship and betrayal, but it had also made me capable, resilient, and ready for whatever life would bring next. I realized that my story was no longer about the people who hurt me. It was about the life I chose to create, empowered and unshaken. After everything I had been through, I finally moved into a home of my own. It was beautiful, filled with light and warmth, a place where I could be free and respected. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to worry about being treated as less than anyone else. Every corner of the house reminded me that I had fought for this life and earned it through patience, strength, and perseverance. With my new freedom, I wanted to do more than just live for myself. I began mentoring young women and supporting orphan children, offering guidance and care that I had longed for when I was their age. Teaching them, helping them believe in themselves, and showing them that they could overcome hardship gave me a deep sense of purpose. I saw hope grow in their eyes, and it reminded me of the strength I had discovered within myself. Each small success they achieved felt like a victory I had helped create, and it made my own journey feel even more meaningful. As I settled into this new chapter, I also found space to nurture genuine friendships. People who appreciated me for who I was, who valued honesty and kindness, came into my life slowly but surely. I learned to trust again, to open my heart carefully, and to allow others in without fear. It was a new experience, one that felt fragile at first but grew stronger with time. For the first time, I felt connected not because of obligation, but because of choice and mutual respect. Living in my own home, helping others, and building friendships brought me a sense of peace I hadn't known since before my parents died. I reflected on my journey, the betrayal, the cruelty, the years I spent struggling, and realized how far I had come. Every painful moment had shaped me, but none of it had broken me. I had survived, learned, and grown, and now I had the chance to create a life filled with meaning, freedom, and hope. In the quiet moments, I thought about revenge and realized the truth I had discovered along the way. The best revenge wasn't about hurting those who had wronged me. It wasn't about anger or punishment. The true revenge was reclaiming my life, embracing my worth, and living fully without letting bitterness take over. By building a life of dignity, kindness, and empowerment, I had achieved something far greater than I could have imagined. As I looked around my home and watched the children I helped smile, I understood that my journey was no longer defined by those who had tried to hurt me. It was defined by my courage, my choices, and my ability to rise above. I had reclaimed my life without losing myself, and in that, I found the deepest victory of all, a life of hope, love, and endless possibilities.